Buenos días, gracias por acompañarnos a la 16ª emisión del Congreso de Electrónica, Control y Telecomunicaciones de la Universidad Distrital Francisco José de Caldas. En este espacio que se encuentra dentro del marco de este congreso, tenemos un coloquio sobre bioética, tema bastante importante que impacta en todas las áreas del conocimiento. Nosotros hemos querido traer este tema, ya que en las investigaciones que se realizan hoy siempre van a tener un impacto en la sociedad, en el ambiente, pero no hemos podido nosotros, desde el área ingenieril y desde otras áreas, mirar cómo es este impacto. De allí que hemos invitado nosotros a 4 expertos en el tema, bastante reconocidos a nivel mundial, que nos hablarán al respecto. Ellos son el doctor Jeroen, el doctor Lorenzo Cotino, la doctora Moira Patterson y el doctor John Havens. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos. Esperamos que estén todo este tiempo con nosotros escuchando a estos expertos. Muchísimas gracias. Bienvenidos a todos a este espacio del coloquio. Le cedo la palabra a la doctora Ángela Parrado del Comité de Bioética de la Investigación de la Universidad Distrital Francisco José de Caldas. Gracias, feliz día.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Leli, muchas gracias a todos. Bienvenidos, yo soy representante del Comité de Bioética de la Universidad Distrital y les cuento un poquito del Comité de Bioética. El Comité de Bioética es un espacio en el que se discuten, se aprueban, se revisan los aspectos éticos, no solo bioéticos, sino éticos de los proyectos de investigación y las investigaciones que realizamos en la universidad. ¿Por qué? Porque muchas de esas tienen impactos en la sociedad, en la naturaleza, en el medio ambiente, y es importante reconocerlos, mitigarlos o evitarlos. No solamente las investigaciones, sino la creación también, las obras de arte, pinturas, estatuas, representaciones que hacemos pueden tener impactos importantes en nuestras percepciones y en la naturaleza, y por eso es importante este comité que vigile, regule, acompañe estos procesos. Uno de estos aspectos es el manejo de los datos. Los manejos de los datos hoy en día, el Big Data que hablamos por todos lados, estamos manejando datos públicos o datos sensibles, datos de las personas, de los niños, y ahí hay información importante que hay que tener en cuenta y que puede afectar o no, tanto la sociedad como a nosotros mismos en nuestra intimidad. Eso es un poco el tema que se va a hablar hoy en esta sesión, y para eso, pues lo que dijo Leli, tenemos varios invitados, expertos en el tema que lo han pensado, lo han trabajado, han escrito sobre el tema, y pues este evento ha sido producto de la organización de Alberto Delgadillo, quien nos va a presentar mucho más claramente los participantes que tenemos aquí. Entonces, de nuevo, los invito y que bienvenidos a este espacio tan importante como para que conozcamos un poco más los impactos de las diferentes investigaciones, formas y las que tenemos conocimiento sobre aspectos éticos sobre los demás, sobre el ambiente, sobre la naturaleza, sobre los seres humanos. Muchas gracias. Alberto.
Bueno, yo creo que sin más preámbulos voy a presentar a Jeroen y pues daríamos comienzo al coloquio. Jeroen es un profesor universitario y catedrático de Ética y de Tecnología Tecnológica de Delft y editor en jefe Ética y Tecnología de la Información. Actualmente es el director científico de Delft Design for Values Institute. En 2009 ganó el Premio Mundial de Tecnología a la Ética, así como el Premio IFIP para las TIC y la sociedad por su trabajo y TIC. Es miembro permanente de European Group on Ethics, EG, y de la Comisión Europea. Jeroen, welcome to your home de la Universidad Distrital. Please,
Thank you very much. I will try to share my screen. So,
okay, fine.
This is in the middle somewhere, but I want to start here actually. Can you see what I want to show? Yep. Okay, wonderful. So thanks first of all, for the invitation. I would like to provide in 25 minutes a little bit of an overview. I will try to the approach to ethics and technology as it's become very popular and widespread in Europe and also in the rest of the world gradually. It started in the Netherlands, and I will tell you the story about this approach of how to bring ethics closer to technology, whether it's bio, health and life sciences technology, or data science, or AI. It applies across the board. And it is the label for this development or this approach is responsible innovation. And I would like to unpack that for you. What is inside? Very important ingredient is it, and it's very good to see John Havens here as well. He will also undoubtedly speak about that. Is a design approach to ethics. So this is a very important conceptual ingredient in this responsible innovation approach. And you will see, hopefully, also by the examples that I will show, how this will apply to the things that you are thinking about yourself or you're working on. First of all, everyone is talking about this responsible innovation. So we want to use all the benefits of the new technologies, but we want to proceed in a responsible way. Microsoft is developing this, all kinds of games and tools to support people in proceeding responsibly with new technologies. So what is this new development? It starts with the question, innovation, well, that's good, and it's exciting, we're excited about it, but there are certain things that are good to have and certain things that are not so good to have. We know the examples. So the first question seems to be, this is indeed innovative, but is it good? That's a separate question. Everyone is often so excited about innovation, or they want to make a lot of money, which is okay. But the first question we should ask is, it is innovative, but that doesn't imply that it is therefore good. And that suggestion is often made. But if you want to do ethics of technology, you have to pose this question first. There are some things that are obviously very good to have. Here's an example. This is a kind of a device that counteracts the tremor that people who suffer from Parkinson have. You know, they need to be helped with their food, and this thing just counteracts the movement, and they can eat by themselves, you know, without spilling their yogurt or their soup. So that's great. It's a no-brainer. We should do this. It's very simple, straightforward. But here, look at the Amazon Dash button. A couple of years ago, Amazon started with an application of the Internet of Things. So you could stick this on your fridge, like here's macaroni and cheese from Kraft. So if you're running out of that stuff and you want to order, you just push that button, and over the internet, the quantity of macaroni and cheese by Kraft will be delivered on your doorstep. That's great, that's wonderful, but and it can solve some of our problems, although in toilet paper case, it's probably too late. But here you have, before you know, you have an incredible proliferation of this stuff, and everywhere in your household you have many of these things. So if everyone in Colombia or in China would have this, the place would be littered with little kind of push buttons. So the question is this really something that we want, or should we really pause and think about this? Is it useful or unnecessary? Well, Amazon came to the conclusion it's not going to work, it's wasteful, it's not sustainable. And we've thought about something else that comes with problems of its own, as we know. We don't have time to go into that. Yes, we could also think about self-parking slippers. And actually, there have been people who have been thinking about that. Is this really what we want? No, we can and we should aim at solving urgent and important problems by engineering and by technology where we can really make a difference. And there is no shortage of that. The UN Millennium Goals already a decade ago formulated what these problems are, that we at a high level, at an international level, but also at a regional level or in every smart city, we can work on. And now they have been referred to as the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Everyone is working on them, and rightfully so. There is even a global business compact with Ban Ki-moon and the former chairman of Unilever. Every business in the world needs to work individually and in concert on these issues. It's striking to see that the UN has even created a new mechanism that they call the Technology Facilitation Mechanism. And instead of having more conversations between diplomats and politicians and lawyers about UN affairs, now they bring in engineers and innovators and entrepreneurs to help them think about the solutions to these big problems. And of course, you want to solve problems. You don't want to create new ones. You don't want to exacerbate existing ones. You really want to be of help. And so this comes from the realization that new technologies are either part of the problem or the solution, and probably both. So this thinking about our responsibilities has always been on the foreground in Europe. So Europe has always foregrounded and often has been derided and laughed at by other geopolitical blocs in the world, because we always talk about ethics. We had the Lund Declaration that said every R&D project, basically, that is sponsored by EU money, needs to be geared towards those grand challenges, those societal problems that we have. It was restated in 2015. And in Rome, we had a declaration on responsible innovation, where responsible research and innovation should be a central objective across all relevant policies and activities. And actually, the European Commission has put its money where its mouth is. Out of the 80 billion in the Horizon 2020, our largest R&D program, some 500 million has been spent on responsible research and innovation. So what are we talking about concretely here? I'll give you some examples from the Netherlands. Here is a simple bus stop, but it was designed in such a way, with a green roof, that it captures the runoff water, it captures dust particles, it reduces heat stress in the cities, it's transparent, it's very safe, every part of it is sustainable and pleasant. So what you see here is a design that accommodates a lot of the things that we think are worth wanting. So it's a whole list of societal or ethical desirable properties that this solution, this design accommodates in one fell swoop. That's awesome. That's great. Here we have the Dutch ethical Fairphone. So we want our Fairphones our smartphones to be, made of stuff that is not from countries that are run by dictators. It pays workers a decent salary. It has a dual SIM. When a component is broken, you don't have to throw away the whole phone, but you can replace it, etc. So it's very, in all respects, it's a responsible design. And the design accommodates those 6 blue labels and probably more, right? So that's a neat solution. These container ships are big polluters, but 40% of the containers go empty around the world. If we could have a foldable container, so here we could stack 4 in the space of 1 without having to change the infrastructure, the quays, the cranes, the ships, etc. You could really include sustainability in the traditional infrastructure, so that you would move ahead from a moral point of view. Here we have projects in the Netherlands on sustainable energy and coastal safety. So this is tidal energy, flood defense, protection against the water. We are 6 meters below sea level in the Netherlands. With blue energy and ecosystem management. So we let pass the very oxygen-rich water from the sea into those lakes inland. So we do 3 things that we desperately want in one design. Here we have shore projects. So what we do there is we reduce shoreline erosion, we increase fishing yields and creating alternative livelihoods. We reduce wave energy, so damage to the coast. We remove excess nitrogen and heavy metals by these designs. So we have a lot of the things that we desperately want from a societal moral point of view that are worthwhile wanting in one design. Here the same thing. You put your cars underneath the dunes, so you're firming up the protection against floods, and at the same time you tuck away the cars neatly so that it's a very nice environment for people to. So you combine safety, recreation, and the environment. Here, large infrastructural works in the northern part of the country, where we build with and for nature. We accommodate birds and fish. We reuse all the renewable forms of energy that we can lay our hands on. So we combine mobility, recreation, and wildlife. Here, there's alternative bitumen or asphalt that reflects the light. So you can apply less light, so save energy. It provides more traction to the tires, so it's safer, and it's more silent. So 3 things you desperately want combined in one design. Here you have 3D printed nanomaterials for hip prosthesis. What you desperately want is you want the blood vessels to grow rapidly around the site of the surgery. You want bone tissue to regenerate very quickly, and you want to kill the bacteria that you may have left at the site of the surgery. So 3 things you want in order to get your mortality rates and your surgical complications down, and you have managed to do all of these things by one brilliant idea. The bronchoscope, same thing. They've been working on this, colleagues of mine in Delft, to make it have all of these nice properties. And then they found out that their ideal solution was very difficult to sterilize. So they had to work on that as well. So you see, constantly engineers are trying to push the ethical envelope. They're trying to embed and integrate more desirable properties into their design. So what are these examples of this pattern? You have a number of moral values and you want to satisfy them all at the same time. And you want to design and come up with an innovation that can do that. So a key feature of responsible innovation is designing new functionality that allows you to expand the set of obligations that you can satisfy. Now, there are 2 core ideas in this that I want to discuss. First of all, values and design. Designs and technologies are not neutral, they come with inscribed values. And sometimes it's important and sometimes it's trivial, but you don't know when, which is which. So this is an example. If you don't want to chase people who want to sleep on benches in the park away with 50 people or patrolling through the park, you can do this. You can build in kind of an iron rod that prevents people from sleeping. So that's a design solution. In this case, you may have a discussion about whether that's an interesting solution to your problem. Perhaps you have to provide jobs to those people or housing to people who don't have a house. But in any case, you see what I'm getting at. Here, this is a famous example, New York, Brooklyn, discussed by Langdon Winner, who wrote this famous paper, Do Artifacts Have Politics? And yes, they do have, it's a rhetorical question, they do have politics. This is a low-hanging overpass that was designed by the architect in such a way that the buses from the poor Black neighborhoods could not be routed to the beaches for the white middle class near New York. So it's a racist overpass, right? So it's a crude piece of civil engineering, but it does have expressed and embedded into it a certain norm or value. And we see this all over the place, of course. The digital technology is a very clear example where you could introduce all kinds of biases by models, by algorithms, etc. Same for Facebook. It's well known now. You can make things that break down because you want people to buy new stuff. You could design and produce a centennial light bulb. It's in Chicago, I think, somewhere. You can design things for addiction so that people will stick around and click and buy more than they would otherwise do. So this idea of a value that's expressed, a racist or a commercial value that's expressed in a piece of technology, this is happening all the time, and you must and you can use this responsibly. Now, because everything from A to Z in our environments is designed, it's this solidification of a set of choices that have been made by designers. And so it's very much true what Churchill said. We shape our buildings, and thereafter our buildings shape us. We become like the things that we build and live in and live with. especially clear in information technology at every level. The choice of your ontology, your algorithms, your infrastructure, your interfaces is the solidification of hundreds of thousands of choices when we're talking about complex software. So how can we design for these values? Well, this is the basic structure. You have a set of values, and they belong to the world of ethics and norms and values and ideals and principles. And you want to express them in the things that you design and engineer, your engineering design. And if you have done so, you want to be able to explain and justify, and even audit, that you have put these values, which are kind of non-functional requirements, into the things that you've made. This is the problem of value-sensitive design, let's say. We have written a handbook, don't buy it, it's too expensive. We're working on an open access version, designing for X, where X ranges over a particular value. There are whole communities and bodies of knowledge associated with this. So what we do is with students, and more, this is part of the teaching in the Netherlands, but also more and more so across Europe. We're teaching engineers to work with values as high-level non-functional requirements that are then specified in a traceable and in a transparent and an accountable way until you hit requirements. So we do these value hierarchies. So privacy, great. What do you mean privacy? Well, which norms are obviously implied in that? Well, risk mitigation, for example. What do you mean risk mitigation? Well, of course, grading your data clustering, pseudonymization. The big advantage of these kind of breakdowns and specifications is that you can actually point your finger and say, well, here I would do it differently. I would have this or that, or I would add that and that, or I would specify this in a different way. This makes ethical debates tractable, right? And we do these things routinely with students and also in projects with business. So yeah, well, you have to do this constantly, not just once in a couple of years, but every day. You have 21 definitions of algorithmic fairness. What do you mean? Which one do you pick? Which one do you implement, and why? So you can design against crime. There's a whole body of literature doing that. So you could come up with interesting designs to prevent people to steal your chair while you're having a cappuccino. Design for activity in office spaces, design against obesity and obesogenic environments, design for refugees, design for darkness and light pollution, design against terrorism, design against flooding. Now you can see that you have a lot of things to worry about, a lot of those values like privacy and equity and justice and dignity, and you cannot just selectively shop and say, well, okay, human dignity today, and yeah, we'll put democracy on the back burner. We'll wait a little bit for that. No, you have to do all of these things at the same time. And that, of course, gives you the problem of conflicts and dilemmas and trade-offs that you have to make. Usually this is portrayed as a problem. And my suggestion is it's not making it easier, but it's not a final problem. It's also an opportunity. It sounds like a cliche, but we found in our research that it is. You're morally overloaded. You want prosperity and sustainability, job growth and sustainability, security and privacy, efficiency and safety, accountability and confidentiality. So the suggestion here is that by trying to square the circle, by trying to have it all, you may incentivize yourself and others to come up with really innovative solutions. So here it obviously failed. Here we tried to have a sustainable safe bus, but it was just a sustainable unsafe bus. Light material, plastic, aluminum, and liquid gas, and it exploded. You want a sustainable and safe bus. So you want a safe patient record system for the whole country, and you want it privacy respecting. We failed in this, so it was not privacy respecting. And the same thing for smartifying the electricity grid. You had a smart meter in order to reduce CO2 and energy consumption, but it was not privacy respecting. So we had to begin at square one. We just threw it out after 10 years of research and development. We had to just jettison it. So there was not a smart meter in your household. It was a stupid meter. It should have been designed from a privacy perspective right from the start. So this is the structure of your problem. The structure of your problem is you want your sustainability and you want your privacy, or you want your privacy on the street and you want your security, your cameras, you want to catch the crooks, right? So often you have a first generation stupid camera system. You want your security at a certain level and your privacy at a certain level. So the right hand upper hand white square is the space where you need both your values above a certain threshold value. But a first generation camera system would give you sharp images of the innocent citizens and blurred images of the crooks. So you have neither your privacy nor your security. Or you have a second generation camera system, which is much better, and that you hang everywhere. So you have a lot of security, but no privacy, or you don't hang it everywhere and you have a lot of privacy, but unfortunately no security. You see where we're getting at. You want a 3.0 camera system, a new generation that allows you to have your cake and eat it. So that brings you the security you want without violating your privacy. And this is an exemplification of a philosophical principle that if you have an obligation to do both A and B, then you have a second order obligation to see to it that you can do both A and B. If I have, the obligation to save John's life and Alberto's life, then I have to make sure that I can, or think about it at least, how I would be able to do that. So this is the principle that is underlying, moral principle that is underlying responsible innovation. If you can change the world by innovation today, so that you can satisfy more of your obligations tomorrow, you have a moral obligation to innovate today. It's not guaranteed that you can always satisfy it and get to those silver bullets that allow you to do so. But at least when the stakes are high, you have an obligation to try. Now, can all problems be solved in this way? Well, important subsets of problems can. For example, privacy by design has been in Europe, at least, and now gradually all over the world, has been written into the law. It's required that your IT solutions are privacy by design. So you have to build it in. And it's business, actually. A lot of people are doing this. And they only have this business because people started to think 20 years ago ethically about architectures and about technology. This is a simple example. You want to count the number of people, but you don't want to give up their identities or violate their privacy. You can do this by coarse-graining the data, just reducing, and there are very sophisticated techniques to do that now. So you want, in Germany, for example, right? They wanted economic progress, but they had the green parties that were protesting against every factory they were opening. So they were morally overloaded. So you have economic growth and a green movement. So now they have become leaders, actually, in clean tech and sustainable energy, because they had to innovate themselves out of that bind, out of that dilemma. And they didn't accept that dilemma, but they thought about something clever. And everywhere where you have these zero commitments, zero road traffic accidents in Sweden, zero emissions, zero preventable children dying, then it signals that people are committed to these moral axiomas, and they will try to change the world accordingly. So Volvo, for example, they started to think about safe cars, safe for the driver, but not very safe for the people who were around the car. And then when they realized that, they started to, as a first, to think about the sensor systems to spot pedestrians and cyclists, etc. And so that was another innovation. And now they realized recently that their crash dummies were modeled after soldiers from the army. Now, not every passenger is a sturdy, big bloke. They also have very vulnerable passengers, and they started to design for them. You see, those innovations will be inaccessible to people who are not willing to think from a moral point of view and are really concerned about the well-being of their passengers. By the way, often this is seen as a problem and yet another constraint. We have to think about ethics in our innovation. Well, actually, a lot of research is pointing in the direction that constraints are actually good for innovation. So in the limitation, you can show how you are a master of your stuff. An interesting story, and I close off with that, is the story about Apollo 13. Right? So they had four astronauts locked and going to die soon because they were running out of clean air. They had to think about a filter, but they had to improvise. And the guy in mission control said to his engineers, you have only 4 hours. I want you, when you leave this room and you're going to think about the solution, I want you to believe that these guys are coming back. Right? So and that kind of commitment to your obligations, in this case to 4 astronauts, but also your obligations when it comes to climate change to future generations or to the privacy rights of citizens in your city. You have to think that you can think of something, a clever idea, an innovation, and that is morally driven. That's the lesson. You can also lie about it, of course. You can suggest that you have reached that white square in the upper on the right-hand square, but you actually haven't. And that is, of course, a wasted opportunity to innovate. You suggest, like Volkswagen and many others did, I have the best efficient motor management system, and it is very sustainable. Well, if you would have done that, you would have had a great innovation, but unfortunately you didn't because you lied about it. So in conclusion, there is moral progress by innovation. Innovation is a form of moral progress because you expand the set of obligations that you can satisfy because you've tweaked the world. You've come up with a clever idea that other people didn't have. So innovation could be driven by moral values, and we must learn our engineers and future engineers to design for moral values. So that's how I would like to close off, and I hope you have a very fruitful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeroen. At the end, we are thinking in the conclusion and the question. Yes. John, could you present? Lorenzo is in traveling and it has sending us a video. I think in change the order. Could you please present your?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
And do you have my PowerPoint, or should I share my screen?
No, share your screen, but first, just a moment, and I present you. Okay.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay. Just a second, please. Bueno, hoy nos acompaña John C. Havens.
Cámara, Alberto.
Ay, perdóname, sí. Excuse me. Bueno, hoy nos acompaña John C. Havens. Él es el autor del estándar de ética en sistemas autónomos inteligentes. Es director ejecutivo de la iniciativa global IEEE de ética de las comunidades autónomas de sistemas autónomos inteligentes. La iniciativa tiene 2 elementos principales: la creación e iteración de un cuerpo de trabajo conocido como diseño éticamente alineado, una visión para priorizar el bienestar humano con autonomía en los sistemas y la identificación y recomendación de ideas para proyectos de normas centrado en priorizar las condiciones éticas. Bueno, yo vivo maravillado, digamos, de como la historia de John. He is an actor. This is just your undergraduate, I understand. Bueno, él es un, digamos, él es un polifacético. Fue actor, luego se unió al IEEE. Es una persona, digamos, bien polifacética. Entonces los dejo en compañía de John. Please, John, could you share your presentation and go ahead, please?
All right. Well, let's see. I am sharing my screen, and let me know if you can see the presentation. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Are you okay?
Yeah. Fine.
Okay. Y buenos días. Hablo un poquito de español, pero mi vocabulario es mínimo. Pero me gusta español y estudié en la escuela secundaria y la universidad también. Pero hablo en inglés.
In Broadway, you perform an Spanish.
No, I wish.
Oh,
And
okay, fine.
It's kind of you to mention the acting thing. I haven't done that for years, but it does help me when I present. So anyway, thank you again. Gracias for the invitation to speak. And such a delight to get to see Jeroen, just because Jeroen, as you know, you're one of my initial inspirations in this field. And so much of what Jeroen said basically is just going to be a big yes, and it was really a wonderful way to help my presentation to have him go first. So thank you to Jeroen as well. Okay, so responsible innovation and ethically aligned design. I'm going to come from the perspective of the place where I work, which is called we call it IEEE. It's an acronym talking about engineers. And IEEE was founded about 100 years ago by Thomas Edison. And now it's very large. It's got about 500,000 members in more than 160 countries. But these are people who actually pay to be members versus volunteers. And most of the work I do actually is leading volunteers. So the numbers of people that work around the world on some kind of IEEE work is well into the multiple millions of people. And I am honored to be a part of the IEEE Standards Association, which is one of the operating units of IEEE. And I'll mention more about this in a little while, but actually where I first met Jeroen and where I first learned about ethics really started in 2013. I was writing a book called Artificial Intelligence, Embracing Our Humanity to Maximize Machine Learning, because I was looking to see if there was a code of ethics for artificial intelligence. So I'll start my presentation from that point in terms of my background, and I'll talk more about the present work at IEEE. But the tagline, as you can see here, the slogan for IEEE is Advancing Technology for Humanity. But when I first approached IEEE, especially one guy named Konstantinos Karahalios, who is the managing director for IEEE Standards Association, he really made all this work happen inside of IEEE and externally now. It's taken a while, but people like Jeroen, there's so many colleagues around the world who don't necessarily work at IEEE, but whose work is also moving the field forward, if not defining the field, people like Jeroen. Anyway, however, at IEEE, it's very big, but the tagline, Advancing Technology for Humanity, Konstantinos and I talk about this a lot. It's the word for that's critical. Meaning, if you just say advancing technology for humanity and don't define the for, much like Jeroen just spoke about, you can create a piece of technology without intending it to cause harm. But the emissions, like Jeroen gave those great examples, the car may have horrible emissions standards. And just because someone says these are the best emissions standards we've ever produced, that's misleading and it's not responsible. For means you have to define what is responsible, or in this case, what does advance technology for humanity mean? And frankly, what does advance mean? Are we advancing by speed to market? Are we advancing by creating more stuff? Or, no big shocker here. Our view is the exact same as Jeroen's. You must, from a design standpoint at the beginning, at the outset of design, say not just how can we create cool technology that people will use, but does it increase human well-being, environmental sustainability, pretty much as first priorities, And also, like Jeroen said, those constraints, that's the innovation. There's so much opportunity right now for innovation in this regard. So some of this, again, may be redundant with what Jeroen said, but just to provide the same kind of background. What is the current kind of focus on human-centric innovation? And I want to be clear, I want to move aside. I love how Jeroen talked about moral obligations. That's fantastic. But I'm going to move that aside just to sort of say, how can we also speak to designers, to manufacturers, to data scientists, to academics, and ask this question: what are we optimizing for? The moral question, especially in my experience going to, say, corporate friends, and I used to work as an EVP at a top 10 public relations firm, so I get the constraints of business, which are challenging. And really, there's a legal structure in most businesses, a legal global structure to satisfy what's called exponential growth for shareholders. I want to unpack those words. Exponential growth means the first priority that you're optimizing for is not just profit. Nothing wrong with profit. We all have to pay our bills. And sustainable businesses need to think ahead. How do we make profits to survive? Of course. But if the actual choice, the business decision, is exponential growth, then you're prioritizing and optimizing for that. So this example, and not trying to pick on Facebook per se, but to point out that their meaningful social interaction, an exercise I did at 2018, and this is from my friend Jonathan Stray, who's done wonderful work on this idea. This is his term with regards to what are we optimizing for in terms of AI. So I just want to credit Jonathan. It's not a surprise, and it's not, quote, morally evil per se, that what the most businesses are optimizing for, if not all, is this idea of, in the case of the Facebook situation, advertising revenue or getting more people to buy things. That's the focus. When I worked in public relations, there's a term called a marketing funnel, and our clients came to us, and that's always what we used. Innovation was, how do people have awareness of your product? How can they try your product? Or if it's a service, how can they be aware of it? How can they pay for that service? And then how can they talk to their friends or colleagues or whoever and buy more? So the entire underlying focus of everything was exponential growth. This is a constraint that hinders responsible innovation more than anything else. And frankly, even, quote, AI for good, which is fantastic, the concept of it. But if the good is not defined and the for, like I said before, how are you getting to that good and what is the good? Then what you're actually always doing is serving what's called a single bottom line mentality, even if that's not your intention. Doesn't make a difference. Where the world sees GDP, or gross domestic product, as the main constraint, or the main metric rather, of looking at the world, that's what's going to be served. So if you don't know, one of my favorite economists, Joseph Stiglitz, in 2008 was asked by the then President Sarkozy of France, gathered together President Sarkozy, Amartya Sen, Joseph Stiglitz, and said, figure out once and for all, is gross domestic product, this metric, how you can actually measure what is best for societal progress. Back to that question, advancing technology for humanity. Is the for any organization focused on that one metric? And the answer in 2008, this is a quote, a direct quote from the Stiglitz Commission report: human well-being is easier to measure than productivity. I'm going to say that again. Human well-being is easier to measure than productivity. Now, I bring this up because there's sort of this sense that, well, GDP was sort of law that came from the beginning, the Greeks or the Romans or the time of the dinosaurs. GDP is an ideology and a statistical measure that can be very effective, and I'm not saying we should throw it away. However, it is myopic, meaning very focused on one thing for what it was designed for, to measure productivity. That means if that constraint, and people don't even know about it, the average person doesn't walk around thinking, how does GDP influence my life? Well, here's how it influences their life. It's the one global metric everyone, policymakers, businesses, academics agree on and use. And that means it's the first thing that gets talked about in policy meetings. It's the first thing that gets talked about in quarterly revenue meetings. And the logic is we have to hit our numbers. Those numbers are this, typically GDP only measuring exponential growth, or I should say, even if they measure other things, what's prioritized is exponential growth. In my experience in the business world, the question, did we hit our numbers, means, did we have exponential growth for every quarter? And that's how decisions are made. But it's not the right tool. It's not enough, as Jeroen was saying as well. So this is our focus, IEEE, and the idea of human-centric responsible innovation. So Europe is doing so much groundbreaking work with regards to thinking about regulating AI. And I know the term regulation for my business friends tends to be frightening. I think regulation needs to be innovated, and that's those constraints, like Jeroen was saying, are just as exciting as they should be upsetting. The main logic I've found, this was the case for me when I worked in business, is when someone said we want to regulate or we're thinking about, ethics, and mostly what we all got scared about was our money. Are you affecting our bottom line, our profits? Versus asking, what about human well-being and environmental sustainability? Not even because those are your political or personal affiliations, but responsible design also has to be sustainable design. And sustainability, certainly in terms of the planet, you have to have water, resources in your supply chain, but also human mental health, for instance. And this is not a question of, will AI take our jobs? This is reality of where in the midst of COVID, after 2 years, globally, human mental health around the world, one thing, unfortunately, that's common is now their mental health has declined. And so when you design technologies like Jeroen showed, like that beautiful technology for Parkinson's, my dad had Parkinson's. I would have bought that spoon in a heartbeat to give him his mental health back, rather than watch him every meal be upset about that spoon. That is brilliant. And think about if you have members of your family that suffer from Parkinson's, and then they had a tool like that. That means you're designing that spoon, but maybe every piece of cutlery, right? Maybe you saw that spoon and you're like, I want to build a cup or a coffee mug or a phone. I want the accelerometer in a phone to mirror that spoon. And now when my father, if he'd picked up his phone, he wouldn't have been reminded about that. That means it's increasing his mental health. That can, and what I'm saying is should be a mandate. And if we need to regulate it, fine. You want to know why? Because if all of us don't think about mental health, human well-being, and environmental sustainability right now, it's not just 2030 where our planet will be at the point of maybe no return with emissions. It's people and their mental health. But on a positive note, the EU high-level experts group, this is directly from their report. AI is not an end in itself, right? The artificial intelligence and the technology is beautiful, it's amazing. It's not what's actually going to do the work if the priority is releasing it like everything else, single bottom line. But it's a means to increase human flourishing. And flourishing is a term in positive psychology, meaning empirical psychological science or medical science. It's a term that's also used in social science, in human rights. Flourishing is a long-term state for a person that involves their physiology, their mental health, but also things like access to education or transportation, et cetera, et cetera. But my whole point here is to show that what I'm talking about is not some fanciful, esoteric thing. This is something where the leadership in so many parts of the world is already embracing this idea of kind of a triple bottom line mentality. Okay, so now I'll just talk about some specific IEEE stuff. And the programs that I lead are all open to anyone. They're free. So I will pitch you, but when I pitch you, it's to join these committees made up of volunteers. One I'll mention who I met through, I think it was through Jeroen at TU Delft, is Virginia Dignam. She's now in Sweden. She's a dear friend, and she's a massive thought leader in the world of AI ethics. And she's on the executive committee of the group that I'm executive director for. This whole chart is to show that ethically aligned design, which was a report that IEEE put out, the first version in 2016, with about 100 global thought leaders who were volunteers. That was used by the OECD, by the Future of Life Institute, by multiple business organizations like IBM to create their responsible AI principles. We also worked directly with the OECD to help them create their principles. We've been working with other partners like UNICEF and UNESCO. And the whole point of this is not as much to brag about IEEE, except to say that now this document, Ethically Aligned Design, is 300 pages. It's Creative Commons. The latest version came out in 2019, but we feel that it's very evergreen. It can be used still with all the different chapters to not just have principles, but to put those principles into practice. And like Jeroen was showing, design tools when you innovate and when you scenario plan and you build, to knowably say we're working to envision not just the principles, but how those principles will be instantiated or seen or experienced by end users. So this is a little bit more about ethically aligned design. We have these different chapters, things like well-being, like I've talked about. One thing I want to mention is there's a wonderful chapter called Classical Ethics in AI. This is the idea that we can't only work with Western-oriented principles, which are very dualistic in nature, and that's fine, but there are Eastern principles, and there are principles from the global South, of course, and Colombia, for instance, and also indigenous cultures. If you want to build global technology, you have to understand the idea of rationality that's imbued in most Western ethics. And this is a term from a great paper called From Rationality to Relationality about Ubuntu ethics, written by my friend Sabello. There's two parts in general to humans, our rational side, but our relational side, how we interact with each other. And this also involves a systems thinking mindset. And that again, when you design, you can't only design for human well-being, you have to design for environmental sustainability. And sustainability is not just not harming the planet, it's improving the planet. And we're a part of the planet. We can't operate without water, etc. So that's part of the mix. So a couple specific things I'll mention, and I also want to be sensitive to time. So if the organizers go ahead and send me a chat message, if you would, at like 5 minutes, because I want to be sensitive. But this standard just came out a few weeks ago, IEEE 7000. Very proud of it. I was the founding chair, but then my friend Ali Hassami took over. And there's a global thought leader named Sarah Speakerman, who actually has a methodology called value system engineering. That's based on value sensitive design that Jeroen talked about. And basically exactly like Jeroen mentioned, there are methodologies in 7000 that allow engineers and data scientists who aren't used to working in marketing or social science to say, what are the end users' values, like privacy? And then how can you go through and really methodically think about different aspects of privacy? And in the case of 7000, you actually translate, by that I mean communicate what their end users' concerns are or may be, and then actually put them into systems level design requirements for systems engineering. So this is critical, right? We have built this tool, and by we, I mean the volunteers that worked for 5 years on this problem, to say, how do you help people who aren't applied ethicists, essentially have a simple methodology to always be asking, how are the end users going to think about this technology? Trust is a two-way street. I can build something that's responsible, and I define responsible as it won't cause harm. And if I've done all these things I mentioned, I've done my best to understand the end user values who use it. But trust comes once those end users use the technology, and they will trust what you've made more if they know this effort has come into play, versus just, as Jeroen gave examples to, shoving stuff out into the market where the main priority is exponential growth. It's the exponential growth constraint that is the harm. That is what causes the harm, period. It doesn't mean that it's an intentional, but that's not responsibility. Responsibility is not, I don't really know what I'm building, but I got to get it out fast to make my fiscal numbers. That's not responsible. And it has to end, or human well-being and the environment won't be sustained. So the good news is 7,000 says, we understand that. And engineers, you're not applied ethicists. Use this standard for everything you build. And you'll be asking, at least in a very simple, pretty complex way, how do I design differently? And when you design differently and use this methodology, it is an R&D, research and development, innovation, scenario planning tool. You will discover ways to improve your product that will also improve sales. And again, we're not saying exponential growth sales, but we're saying your tools will be more relevant and trusted by using this type of standard. So there's that. 7010 is another standard. I was the founding chair of this, and then my friend Laura Musikansky took over. We call this a societal impact assessment tool because what it does is show all the different metrics or indicators like the UN Sustainable Development Goals or the Millennium Goals like Jeroen talked about, and literally just introduces designers or engineers into the fact that these exist. So there's a thing called the Happy Planet Index, for instance. It's very data heavy, got a lot of great data. So it's not just a metric that says, here's some numbers and do this. It's here's data about people who have done design work focused on the planet. When you say I'm going to build something and then say we're going to use the Happy Planet Index as a metric of success, or if you want to use a business term, a key performance indicator of success, what you're saying in terms of accountability and responsibility is we know we have to increase the long-term sustainability of the planet. So when we build this autonomous car or this phone, we're going to use the metrics from the Happy Planet Index to say, were we successful? That is a key performance indicator. Not only is what we're making a lot of money, but the trade-offs when you start to think about using these metrics versus not. First of all the things I know from public relations where I used to work, a PR crisis can destroy a company. You put out a car and you try to make it, you don't worry about emissions, and someone gets hurt, your company will get shut down. And frankly, guess what? You should, if you put a car out and you haven't done the testing. But that's a rare example. You put a car out and you've done testing and you're sort of like everyone else. And the car has pretty good emission standards, but the truth is it's not going to hit the goals we need to by 2030. And understandably, the company is saying, well, we have to change, but we can't change overnight. What you can do right now is start to scenario plan and say, okay, we can't change our entire operations model overnight, but we can ask, how would that operations model be more successful for the planet and our business if we really thought about sustainability, meaning long-term planning as our responsible innovation? Then that Happy Planet Index will give you clues. Hey, have you been measuring for this beyond emissions, like increase of green space, increase of oxygen in certain areas where there's more public, like a public park? And it might sound strange, but then a car company could work with a local city to plant more trees, or like Jeroen showed with that wonderful bus stop with the plants on top of it. People say, well, like this is not the idea for me. I'm with a car company. And my answer is, you're with a sustainable transportation company. You're with a company that moves people in a system from one point to the other. And on top of that, you're in a company whose product or service is going to affect human well-being and environmental flourishing. And if you're not measuring any of those effects, you are not building responsibly. And beyond that, it's bad design. I'll use the word bad because it's like saying, I don't feel like measuring these central aspects of what I'm building. It's like building a car and saying, we do the engine really well, but we don't really care about the brakes. That's not the best metaphor. Pick a different one, but it's just correct. The system includes human well-being, and environmental flourishing, and putting something in there, that system, without saying, what are the holistic metrics? What's called the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit of our design. Anyway, 7010 is designed to help people understand what those metrics are, and then even scenario plan in such a way that they could build knowing we're going to improve human well-being and the environment with what we do. And that also is going to start to improve or really grow trust with end users, because they're going to say, this company, this government, this organization, this NGO is saying we want to be held accountable to, and we're happy to show people that these are the three things we're focusing on, not just, measuring profits and having exponential growth as a key performance indicator, but saying our products or services will do this. And by the way, companies like Danone, Timberland in the States, they're changing their legal structure as well. There's a thing called the B as in boy, Corp, B Corporation. They're changing their legal structure to honor this mindset. So it's really happening what I'm talking about here. My colleague Moira, who is going to be speaking now after me, will be doing more about this subject, but I just want to point out that children, a lot of times I think people think like, yay, let's help the children. And there's sort of this mindset of like, yeah, we got to help the kids. Well, that children, they're actually little human beings. Technically, they're little humans. So they are literally who we're designing for. And if the short-term mindset keeps happening, we just build to get stuff out to market fast. More and more, the children who are especially 13, 14, 15, they will not buy the products and services that are created that don't honor the environment or their well-being. Not to end on I'm going to end on a positive note and I'm wrapping up. But I know so many people now whose children are saying they don't want to have children. They don't want to have children because they don't think that people my age, I'm 52, are taking care of the planet. And you know what? They're right. They're just right. So it's not about good or evil per se. It's about recognizing in this mindset. I do think, as Jeroen was saying, the moral obligation is to save our planet, improve it, save and prioritize our children and people, and improve that well-being. But from a design standpoint, it's also critical to understand that we got, 5-10 years. If we don't change the single bottom line mindset from a design standpoint, there are no more people to sell to. So on a positive note, two last things. We just released a certification model with the city of Vienna. Very excited. We're like a good housekeeping seal, or I should say a fair trade coffee mark. The logic is to have AI systems or algorithms or products eventually have a mark that can be seen by the general public, that when you pick up a phone, and I probably should wrap up, right? Anyway, that's happening. And then this is my last slide. Responsible innovation must prioritize human well-being. It must prioritize environmental sustainability. And by prioritize, I mean that's the first thing that has to be discussed in design and policy. And whether it's regulation, law, companies doing it themselves, the whole point is that the constraints and actual logic of design, if these things aren't prioritized, they will continue to be ignored, and sustainable innovation won't be able to happen. And then, as Jeroen was saying as well, all design, not just for AI, all design must utilize methodologies honoring human values, or those human values, again, also won't be prioritized. So with that, I'll just say thank you, muchas gracias, and I really appreciate the invitation.
Many, many thanks, John. Moira, please. Hi, Moira. Are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, fine.
Would you like me to get started?
Give me a second, and
okay.
I'm presenting you, please.
Thank you.
Bueno, Moira es también perteneciente a IEEE. Ella es investigadora en el campo de Derecho a la Formación, investigadora principal en proyectos financiados por el Consejo de Investigación de Australia, directora de Asuntos de Mercado Global y Participación de la Comunidad. Ella trabaja mucho en la parte de Data Governance con los niños y comunidades. Tiene un trabajo sorprendente en África, en todo lo que tiene que ver pues, con ética. John lo dijo ahí hace poco, en lo que comentó. Entonces, voy a darle la palabra a Moira. Moira, please, could you share your screen and start
Yes,
your talk? Yeah.
yes, I am just, oh, here we go. Trying to share. You cannot, okay, so it tells me I can't start while another participant is sharing.
John is sharing
Oh,
too.
okay, hold on. Okay, and I hope that you can see my screen. Let me just maximize.
Perfectly. Perfect.
Great, maximize the view. All right, there we go. Good day, buenos dias. And I also thank you for the invitation. And it's my pleasure to be here at this really important colloquium, speaking about really the need for incorporating a holistic view into the engineering profession. And I think John has already set a really good foundation and spoken in great eloquence and depth about why that is important and why IEEE is committed to that. So that makes my job a little easier in, building off of what he spoke about and speaking a bit more specifically about the future, about how we build better online and offline environments for children and with children in our minds. So my plan is to speak about that and to focus on also how we leverage standards and related activities in order to support and achieve the engineers in that endeavor. And you've already heard about IEEE and IEEE's mission of advancing technology for humanity, so I will not repeat that, but I think it's just to reiterate the commitment and the strong interest that we have, and also to reiterate the strength of IEEE as a platform that brings together technologists, but also other societal stakeholders from around the world. You see our membership is from over 160 countries. We have over 420,000 members, but we also work with people who are not members, who are not traditional technology practitioners, but who have other types of expertise, from psychology to child development to sustainability, and who see, like I think the world increasingly sees, that that our interactions online and with connected devices really are deeply integrated with our life. We can't treat them as a separate domain that we don't look at as part of really our regular life. I work with an expert who often talks about the fact that we talk about the real world. In the real world, it goes like that, to distinguish it from online. But I think we all see more and more the impacts of the online world on the real world, or perhaps the merging of the two. So we can't really treat the online world as a completely separate domain and leave it to a specialized discipline that only looks at it from a technical perspective. And so before I start speaking about the topic in terms of really how it impacts children and what we do, I want to briefly speak about standards in a little bit more detail. John already showed several of the really leading standards that are tools to help people who build online products and services, to help them make them responsible and better, more positive for the world and the users we talked about. But perhaps to get a little bit more specific on that, how do standards do that? How are the consensus documents and the consensus tools that are developed do that? There are several really important aspects to that. So the standards ensure interoperability between different products, different steps of the products, but so that different companies, right, vendor interoperability, can all contribute to the same ecosystem. They are really foundational to our online world. So the standards facilitate this interplay of enabling everybody to contribute to the online world. They also, of course, have other roles in market creation and in advancing those. They also help reduce market risk, and I think it's important to think about it. John talked a lot about how companies think about things, and I think that is a very important aspect. Standards are considered best practices where a group of experts comes together and defines the best practice. And of course, following best practices is a way to for a company to reduce risk. But it also can be expanded, and not just from that perspective, but also from the policy perspective or the regulatory perspective. Standards are often referenced in those environments where regulators will say if you as a company follow certain standards, you are deemed to meet the regulatory requirements. And so it can be a tool from the perspective of the regulators as well. And in areas where there are challenges or where there are new developments, it's important to develop what is acceptable and what is not acceptable and what works well, what are the best practices. So the standards journey is really a big part of developing that. But now I will pivot really to more of the focusing on why it matters. So when we think about children, and children are our future, and children are really one of the key demographics, right, in the online world, and we all care deeply about children and about leaving a positive future for our children. But in this online world, none of us, or most of us, didn't grow up in the online connected world. We grew up, in a very different world where play was outside and play was with physical toys and more tangible. So we are really working on providing childhood in a new environment. And children make up about 1/3 of internet users around the world. So that is a huge demographic and a huge portion of the online population. But children do have different needs from adults. Children are still growing up. And of course, we all know children at age 5 or at age 10 or at age 15 have very different understandings and abilities to navigate and negotiate the online world. We often hear the term evolving capacities, and that's the understanding that children really do have different understandings and cognitive abilities to engage with the online world. but that is not always fully understood by families and by children themselves, of course. Children get online tools and engage with them. So we really need to think about, how do we create a space where they can grow up in a manner that aligns with their needs, with their capacities, that is safe, but not only safe. The dialogue about children in the online world has started with a discussion about safety, but the word flourishing was highlighted earlier, and I think it's important to really focus on that as well. Online tools bring a lot of opportunity for flourishing, for enhancing lives. So we talk about examples from how online education or educational tools can help. We've seen this during COVID, where having access to online school was a protection about not being able to have education at all. And that can, of course, also be extrapolated to remote areas around the world where children may not have access to education the same way we do, or where children, another really valuable application is where children have certain special needs, and online tools can be tailored to those special needs and provide supplementary education to really help specific children with specific needs. So while we all have heard a lot of negative press around children online in the last months and years, we should not forget about the positive opportunities. And so that's why we need to make sure that we address the risks. We think about designing appropriately for children up front so that the risks are mitigated and they do have access to all these tools that can enhance their lives. And with that, I want to step back a little bit and talk about the context. So the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which was drafted in 1989, so a little bit over 30 years ago, talks about children's rights and that children have rights, of freedom of expression, of access to information, of really a full life. But of course, again, it's about the age-appropriate context and about protections as well. But it's having access as well. And to build on that, just earlier this year, a general comment number 25 to that was agreed. It was recognized that children's rights need to be considered in relation to the digital environment, and that one of the approaches that has happened is not to be seen as meeting those rights. So one of the approaches that some have taken is to just exclude children, because designing for children may have seemed more daunting. There were more requirements on the designer. So that does not meet the rights of children. Children do have a right to access to information. Children do have a right to be participants in the world, and by extension in the online world as well. There also are a lot of governmental efforts. So just one example is the Age-Appropriate Design Code in the United Kingdom that has officially come into effect just a few months back. It is an attempt to put the best interests of the child at the center of designing products for children, and to also put responsibilities on those who are designing the products for children. So it is shifting the thinking around designing products for children. And one point that I also want to highlight is that in that context, they developed in the UK context, they developed not only guidelines and implementations for industry and for the general public, but they also created guidelines and information about this for children and designed with children, but really to make sure children are included in the larger understanding of where we are. And one point that I now will use to pivot is, I think this is a very powerful statement. And this is actually from that guide that I just showed. But it says that we usually know most of our rights in real life, but we don't talk much about our rights in the digital world. And I think this is where we see a big need for education, transparency, and better understanding of how things work. So this is from the perspective of a young person. But one can also say, I think, from the perspective of technology developers, they don't always think about the rights and the ethical implications. I think that was explained very well in the earlier talks as well. And that's where standards and best practices and guidelines can come in that provide the steps and the very specific things to think about to address this. But it is, I think, a very powerful statement to say that in the digital world, this is still different than from the physical world. And that is really a gap that needs to be filled to make the digital and the online and offline experiences more truly encompassing and inclusive of all of the people. Now, in this particular ecosystem, I just want to highlight some of the activities that IEEE has around that to support this holistic ecosystem. John spoke about some of the work from the Global Initiative on the Ethics of Artificial and Intelligent Systems. But there are a lot of other communities that are working in this space, including the Society on Social Implications of Technology and the Consumer Technology Society and others. So there are a lot of different approaches and different communities coming together and looking to develop guidelines and best practices around this. What are other ways that we get to that? One is to build examples of how to design with children in mind and design positively. We have conducted case study compilations where we sought nominations of companies, organizations that are developing products and services for children, and where they explain and showcase how they ensure that they meet children's rights, or how they think about giving children agency, communicating to children in age-appropriate ways, and really taking those principles that we talked about earlier and putting them into their products. It should be really a seamless experience. These principles have to be part of the user experience, not something that users need to think about or navigate or figure out themselves. So as that happens, there were a lot of great examples. You see the cover page here with the different companies, and they all had different aspects of inclusive design, co-designing with children and with experts who represent children's interests, from child psychologists who really bring that deeper understanding and nuanced understanding of children's needs, to thinking about the legal aspects and how to really document your assumptions around children's needs, and then also around the design processes and data governance. So those case studies are available and are one piece that inform other, the development of best practices where you get specific tools as outcomes. Those were examples from which you can extrapolate more best practices. So we also have a community that is looking at, again, the technical implementations of the children's online-offline experiences. And they are looking at coming up with specific principles and looking at how to translate those technical implementations and best practices into practice, and what different ways are what different tools are needed. How can we provide approaches that already make sure you take into consideration your regulatory context, which differs country to country, as we know, to a degree, but that you are addressing all the different levels and needs of children. There are other, this is really a snapshot of a number of different activities, and I'll speak about a few of them in a little bit more detail, but really, again, the focus is on providing agency to young users, including providing them an environment where they are included, not where they have to sneak in or where you know, the environment is not suitable for them. So looking at inclusion, of course, protection and respect is part of it, and also supporting and empowering. So digital literacy and training and education about technology are also parts of that portfolio. Now, one very important standard that is was just approved this year and will be released, I believe, next week, actually, is IEEE 2089, the Standard for Age-Appropriate Digital Services Framework. And again, the real importance here is that in this graphic you see that it really becomes very concrete, and it tells people who design products for children what things to address, what practices to follow as they go through their design process. And it starts with the preparation phase. So it again highlights that we do need to do, it needs to be something that we think about from the start. And it goes all the way through when the end, post-deployment, even when you're decommissioning a product or a services. So it provides all the different aspects that need to be considered. Not all of these aspects will be in every product or service, but a developer can look at this and decide which portions are applicable and really follow the steps to make sure that they have considered the necessary age-appropriate considerations, that they have a team in place that has the right skills to think about the age-appropriate needs, depending on age groups of the anticipated users and other things. And so this is a very concrete tool that can be used. It is supplementary to a lot of the regulations that are being developed these days, and the best practices that also companies are talking about, because they recognize that they need to meet the needs of children and young people. So this tool will be a valuable asset for them as they, navigate also the changing environment. But it is written in such a way that it is applicable anywhere and can really provide a best practice approach. We expect that it will hopefully get good uptake and really help people design things with all the different age considerations in mind from the start. Data governance is another really key aspect, because what happens to the data that is collected is absolutely important. The big data and analytics and machine learning capabilities are so strong that data is critical, and collecting data from children from even before they were born is just such a big topic, and it needs to be addressed. So we have a standards working group looking at data governance for children. So again, it's thinking through the implications of data you collect. And of course, we all are hearing about the data, the discussions around the world driven by Europe, but also in the US and in Australia and other countries. India has a big debate about this as well, about data governance. So thinking about those issues and making them translatable and implementable in products is what the goal is of this work. And then just highlighting two other programs that, again, more broadly look at dignity, inclusion, identity, trust, and agency, and at resilience. I think one of the things we have seen is that the digital tools enable us to have the potential to provide resilience in crisis. When we don't have access to physical services, they really do have a lot of potential to provide continuity and resilience to humans, to people in their everyday lives. But that we also saw that there are a lot of gaps, and that includes around what happens to the data, understanding what kind of information we have access to, and things of that nature. And so there's a lot of work happening in those spaces as well. And with that, I know I'm at the end, so I thank you for your time and look forward to the other presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moira. Very grateful presentation. Bueno, como el conferencista de España viajó, entonces vamos a mostrar un video. Lorenzo is traveling to Dubai, and he sent us a video. We are reproducing this video in a moment. Yes, please. Give me 1 minute, please.
Muy buenas tardes en España, muy buenos días en Colombia. Es un auténtico placer poder participar en este coloquio de bioética con tan notables colegas para hablar de ética y legislación para investigar y experimentar con inteligencia artificial y tecnologías conexas en la Unión Europea. Gracias a este 16º Congreso promovido desde la Universidad Distrital Francisco José de Caldas desde un país hermano y tan querido como Colombia. Bien, para hablar de esta temática pueden ustedes acudir también a la página web cotino.es, donde pueden acceder a todas las publicaciones. Soy Lorenzo Cotino Hueso, catedrático de Derecho Constitucional y miembro de Odisea, Asociación Española de Impacto Ético y Social de la Inteligencia Artificial. Y en la página web, en el apartado Novedades, o fácilmente con Google, podrán encontrar esta publicación de hace 2 semanas, la guía de buenas prácticas para la investigación con inteligencia artificial y espacios de datos, basada y centrada sobre todo en privacidad, protección de datos y data governance, sobre la que hablaré. ¿De qué vamos a hablar? Pues voy a hacer unas pinceladas, un acercamiento a la estrategia de datos en la Unión Europea, algunos de sus objetivos y problemas, alguna referencia a la economía del dato a las actuaciones propias de la Unión Europea, como especialmente CIECT, la Directiva de Reutilización o la Ley de Gobernanza de Datos en la Unión Europea, impulsos que se están dando desde España y estrategias nacionales, también alguna referencia a Francia y a la noción de gobierno del dato, para pasar luego a hablar de mi libro, del referido a la guía IT, sobre la que veremos pues, algunos elementos básicos del tratamiento de los datos bajo el régimen jurídico de datos personales y también las exigencias éticas y normativas que se están imponiendo respecto de la inteligencia artificial y también centradas en el ámbito de la investigación. Bien, sobre esto, a modo de pregunta, pues daremos alguna rápida respuesta a algunas preguntas básicas sobre ética y normativa en la investigación en estos ámbitos. Pues bien, lo primero que tendríamos que centrarnos es, como ha señalado la Unión Europea, estamos en la cresta de un tsunami, el tsunami de los datos. Si en 2018 se decía que en el mundo estábamos manejando unos 33 zettabytes, estamos hablando ya de previsiones de 2025 que muy seguramente estarán siendo superadas de 175 zettabytes, es decir, estamos en una progresión casi geométrica del crecimiento de datos que se da esencialmente por esta segunda ola, como dice el libro blanco de inteligencia artificial, pues sobre todo si la primera ola vino por el Internet de las cosas, la interactuación humana y la generación exponencial de datos de las personas, ahora se ha dado por el Internet de las cosas, la sensorización y la generación de múltiples datos a partir de tantísimas máquinas conectadas, tantos sensores conectados, generando datos. Bien, esto nos lleva a que haya previsiones de crecimiento enormes, con inversión muy importante respecto de una previsión de inversión de 80% respecto de centros de datos, de instalaciones de datos, no menos de un 20% de crecimiento respecto de sensorización. Y la cuestión es que no está exactamente bien repartido estas inversiones, este crecimiento económico, en tanto en cuanto a las Big Tech son los ganadores hoy, y la estrategia europea claramente es la de no dejar que todo el pastel, todo el crecimiento, todos los beneficios se los lleven las grandes compañías tecnológicas, sino que tanto el sector público como las pequeñas y medianas empresas pues, puedan acceder a esta nueva economía. Para ello, los objetivos esenciales es determinar que esto, y además que es interesante recordar, a ustedes no les interesa especialmente el derecho, pero todo no pasa por cuestiones tecnológicas y de hecho ustedes son víctimas muchas veces de cuestiones organizativas, barreras jurídicas que son las que se están dando para que realmente estemos en una economía data-driven, esté conducida por los datos. No solo es una cuestión tecnológica, se necesitan muchos elementos. Entre ellos, en Europa, por ejemplo, y esto pueden ser lineamientos que pueden ser de interés también para seguir en las políticas en la región de Iberoamericana, pues hay que generar un mercado único de los datos. Esto es lo que quiere la Comisión Europea, un espacio europeo de datos con homogeneidad jurídica y desarrollos tecnológicos que permitan este espacio común a través de sistemas, como vamos a comentar, interoperables y sistemas en los que haya una disponibilidad importante de datos. Acceso por el sector privado, acceso por el sector público, a una, como dice la Comisión Europea, a una cantidad casi infinita de datos de alta calidad, en repositorios, pero con seguridad jurídica, con protección de los intereses de privacidad, protección de datos que hay en juego, de propiedad intelectual y otros intereses de terceros. Se requiere una gobernanza de datos y se requiere para la Unión Europea, pero es predicable de cualquier Estado también, la soberanía tecnológica, evitar una dependencia externa muy fuerte en la gestión de los datos que lleve a que sean otros los que tengan los beneficios de estas políticas de datos. Problemas esenciales: fragmentación jurídica, fragmentación tecnológica, débil sector privado respecto a las pequeñas y medianas empresas, para que no tengan que pasar necesariamente todas por las grandes Big Tech privadas, Y se necesita, sobre todo en el ámbito de la investigación, compartición de datos. Teniendo en cuenta que la investigación que se ha generado, investigación especialmente pagada, sufragada, subvencionada por los Estados y por la Unión Europea, pues genere datos disponibles para la reutilización por otras investigaciones. En este sentido, es especialmente destacable la necesidad de infraestructuras de nube europea. Infraestructuras de nube europea que permitan la interoperabilidad y la compartición de datos. Y en este sentido, se necesitan iniciativas de federación de datos que permitan también la portabilidad, grandes espacios de datos conectados unos con otros con protocolos técnicos y jurídicos que permitan hacer una trazabilidad del dato, sea normalmente no personal o sea personal, y que tengamos resuelto en muy buena medida el marco jurídico y el técnico. Se necesita apostar por políticas de bien común, de datos, de altruismo de datos y de incentivos para compartir datos para quienes los ponen a disposición como quienes son puntos de referencia y nodos de los mismos. Y en este sentido, Gaia X es el gran proyecto europeo para la compartición de datos desde hace un par de años, en el cual ya se encuentran más de 250 entidades privadas y a partir de los nodos gubernamentales de los 27 estados de la Unión Europea también hay participación internacional. Estamos hablando de unos 300 millones de euros de inversión de la Unión Europea para que se pongan en común todos estos datos en nube europea de ciencia para compartir. Se necesitan, como digo, reforzar estas infraestructuras de nube. Desde el punto de vista jurídico, y no les quiero usted aburrirles con temas jurídicos, pero sí que desde 2006 existe una directiva en la Unión Europea sobre reutilización de la información pública que ha partido siempre de los principios de que hay que liberar datos públicos para que puedan ser reutilizados por el sector privado y que desde el 2013 ya está hablando de la necesidad de que estos datos sean legibles por máquinas y que en 2019 contamos con una nueva directiva que están ahora acabándose de transponer por las leyes de los estados que en esencia más allá de buscar que el sector público no encierre sus datos y no los libere para la investigación, sino que eso ya estaba superado, en la directiva del 2019 se obliga a que toda empresa pública o toda empresa que contrata con el Estado tenga que compartir datos. En esos contratos, esos datos generados cuando se contrata con el Estado. Se regula específicamente el incremento de datos de la investigación del sector público, el principio esencial de datos tan abiertos como sea posible, tan cerrados como sea necesario. Los metadatos también forman parte de los datos que tienen que liberarse y compartirse, es decir, ese armario gigante de datos públicos procedentes de subvenciones y de contratos públicos también tiene que abrirse con datos legibles por máquinas y también con metadatos. También se regula la obligatoriedad de disponer datos dinámicos, como por ejemplo los que utilizan habitualmente en el ámbito de las Smart Cities, datos de alto valor. Datos de alto valor han de ser gratuitos como principio. Asimismo, me gustaría señalar la Data Governance Act que se presentó en diciembre del 2020. En esencia, esta Data Governance Act, este Reglamento Europeo de Datos, va a complementar a la directiva de reutilización, pero añade una serie de garantías, como la figura de los proveedores de servicio de intercambio de datos. Es decir, va a haber como unos hubs que se han de dedicar solo a acceder a los datos para ponerlos a disposición. Son puntos neutrales para favorecer el intercambio y el acceso a los datos. Se va a promover el altruismo de datos. Se va a homogeneizar en toda la Unión Europea los formularios de todos aquellos que quieran participar en estas comparticiones de datos, con formularios similares, con mecanismos de facilitar el consentimiento para el uso de los datos también homogéneos, y sistemas de registro de los datos también homogéneos. De igual modo, esta ley de gobernanza de datos lo que pretende es que haya unas autoridades especializadas en reutilización de información en el sector investigativo, en sectores, también en grandes sectores de tratamiento de datos, para que si se solicita acceso a datos y no se consiguen esos datos, en 2 meses acudiendo a estas autoridades, 2 meses haya una solución en la cual pues, se evalúe, esta autoridad independiente especializada evalúe si esos datos se tienen que liberar o si hay que reservar algunos de ellos, pues por ejemplo, con algunos pretratamientos. Y es que la Data Governance Act también regula la obligatoriedad posible del pretratamiento de datos, precocinarlos para que estén dispuestos a la cocina de la investigación. ¿En qué sentido? La obligatoriedad que se puede imponer de que se anonimicen datos para que ya se acceda a datos anonimizados, en su caso pseudonimizados o disociados con separación de aquellas partes confidenciales que deban mantenerse así. Desde el punto de vista español, el programa de reutilización de datos desde el año 2010 se llama el programa Aporta, que ya lanza su 4º desafío. También el 4º plan de gobierno abierto lanza muchas iniciativas de apertura de datos desde distintos gobiernos. Lo que me gustaría subrayar especialmente es que este plan, sobre todo, da un gran salto en el año 2015. Les invito a todos ustedes a conocer datos.gov.es, ese observatorio de la reutilización de los datos en España. Desde 2020 y en 2021 se acaba de nombrar al primer director de la Oficina del Dato para una buena gobernanza del dato. En este punto me gustaría señalar que la gobernanza del dato pasa a ser esencial. La gobernanza del dato no es fácil ahora de definir, no podemos definirla, pero básicamente es lo que, si damos valor al dato, si consideramos que el dato es un activo con ese gran valor, se necesita quien lo recopile, quien depure, quien ordene, quien mejore los datos, los prepare para su reutilización en el sector investigativo, entre otros. Se necesita una organización de quién es responsable de qué respecto de los datos. Los datos, para conseguir una verdadera data-driven economy, es necesario fijar responsabilidades, orquestar los distintos sectores que están implicados en todas las administraciones. Se necesita una visión común desde los distintos sectores para poder orquestar. Se necesita ordenar los recursos humanos especializados para la gestión del dato, nuevos perfiles. Se necesita que quien gestione los datos tenga en cuenta la seguridad, tenga en cuenta la privacidad, la propiedad intelectual, las políticas. Hay que identificar, como digo, los datos, hay que limpiar, fijar y dar esplendor a los datos, como hacía la Real Academia de la Lengua Española, ¿verdad? Bien, aquí tenemos avances desde Nueva York, en Londres, se han implementado las primeras oficinas del dato. En Barcelona tenemos un buen ejemplo en España en 2018. Tenemos también el gobierno catalán con una regulación en 2020 del gobierno de los datos y la archivística, con una oficina del dato, como decía, en España bastante interesante. En esta línea en España, pues me gustaría subrayar que un libro, les recomiendo un libro que creo que tienen ustedes accesible a través de Amazon, es el de Richard Benjamins, que viene de Telefónica, experto, coordinador de políticas de inteligencia artificial de Telefónica España, y acaba de publicar este libro excelente porque es desde la práctica. Estamos hartos de oír que los datos son la savia, el petróleo del siglo XXI, pero no sabemos por dónde fallan en la realidad todos los proyectos de implantarlos en las empresas y de investigar con ellos. Les recomiendo muchos de las recomendaciones que ahí se hacen. En España, por ejemplo, la Autoridad Independiente de Responsabilidad Fiscal ha señalado que los grandes problemas que tenemos en un documento muy valioso del 2020, ha señalado que es necesaria una estrategia nacional para evitar la dispersión, la desconexión, la no interoperabilidad de los datos, la no anonimización de los datos, la inseguridad, la falta de que los investigadores no dediquen todo su tiempo a la gobernanza de los datos para poder investigar con los datos. Decía una investigadora que hoy por hoy el 85-80% del tiempo se dedica a preparar datos, a conseguir datos, a limpiar datos y no más de un 10-15% del tiempo a investigar con los datos. Se necesita una autoridad que recopile, procese, cruce y disponga de los datos. En Francia, por ejemplo, un documento también de 2021 por una política pública de datos, pueden encontrarlo ustedes en Internet, habla de la necesidad de instaurar un administrador general de datos. Que entre otras cosas esta oficina señale una serie de hubs y que pueda incluso hacer requisas de datos para el sector público y la puesta a disposición a privados. Creo que es un documento de total referencia y les recomiendo. Y bien, sobre todo me gustaría ahora centrarme en esta guía de protección de datos que les comentaba, pero sin como punto de partida, desde el tratamiento jurídico. Les señalaré los puntos de partida que han sido recientemente reflejados en la Carta de Derechos Digitales, que ha sido adoptada en España en julio del 2021, hace solo unos meses. Asienta las bases desde el punto de vista de que el uso, como pueden leer ustedes, el uso para el bien común de los datos personales y no personales del sector público y privado se considera un bien de interés general. Punto de partida. Y luego, por supuesto, a partir de las leyes se promoverá las condiciones para la reutilización y el uso de datos de manera abierta y reutilizable para fines de archivo, interés público, investigación científica o histórica, fines estadísticos, innovación y desarrollo, y programas de donantes de datos, sector público y privado. Entre otros lineamientos de este artículo se nos recuerda que la neurociencia, genómica, biónica y otras nuevas ciencias que se están desarrollando se han de seguir el respeto de la dignidad, la libre autodeterminación individual, la intimidad y la integridad de las personas y los principios de la bioética que ya rigen afortunadamente desde hace más de 30 años en la investigación científica. Se señala también como lineamiento que los repositorios de datos personales y no personales tendrán una adecuada gobernanza que asegure el acceso a los mismos en los términos que establezca el ordenamiento jurídico, en condiciones de igualdad, seguridad, trazabilidad de la investigación y garantía de los principios antes enumerados. Pues bien, lo cierto es que desde el derecho podríamos pensar que tenemos todo muy claro, muy bien ordenado, presto para ayudar y facilitar la investigación con estas finalidades públicas y del bien común. Pero en buena medida, ya sea en Colombia, ya sea en España, ya sea en el conjunto de la Unión Europea, ya les he señalado graves problemas y esto a veces recuerda más que algo bien ordenado jurídicamente el ejército de Pancho Villa como ejemplo de desorganización. Y en este sentido puede tener lugar alguno de los lineamientos que en los próximos minutos voy a señalarles de la Guía de Buenas Prácticas del Cumplimiento Ético y Normativo en Inteligencia Artificial centrada en privacidad y Data Governance en el ámbito de la investigación. Está formulada a modo de preguntas. ¿Qué normas se aplican desde el punto de vista español y europeo? Pero creo que les puede ser útiles. También les diría cuándo y dónde se aplica la normativa de protección de datos. Es una guía muy centrada en el ámbito de protección de datos, que es el que por lo general genera trabas para la investigación. Aquí me gustaría recordar que la normativa, esto es una obviedad, la normativa de protección de datos personales se aplica donde haya datos personales que se estén tratando, como en la investigación. ¿Qué es un dato personal? Todo dato vinculable a una persona física. De modo que, si lo que estamos manejando son datos desestructurados no vinculados a personas físicas, por ejemplo, en principio no hay que aplicar la normativa de protección de datos y nos liberamos de ese problema. No obstante, ya les digo yo que por lo general es muy difícil no manejar datos personales. También les señalaría que podríamos acudir a una estrategia, que es quitar la cabeza de los datos, es decir, despersonalizar los datos. Esta estrategia es esencial para la investigación. Intentar anonimizar. ¿Por qué? Si anonimizamos los datos de manera completa, ya liberamos muchísimos peligros que ya no se van a dar y, sobre todo, ya no aplicamos la normativa de protección de datos porque ya no se dan esos peligros. Pero ya les adelanto, hoy en día volver a poner la cabeza al cuerpo que sea un dato no personal es muy fácil. De modo que la mayoría de las agencias relativas a la protección de datos parten de que la anonimización completa es casi imposible, de modo que la normativa de protección de datos se va a aplicar como regla general a todo dato que no esté absoluta e irreversiblemente anonimizado. Al mismo tiempo, la pseudonimización. La pseudonimización significa decapitar los datos, anonimizarlos, le quitamos la cabeza a esos datos para que no sean relativos a personas físicas, pero con la posibilidad de volver a vincularlos. Pero para el grupo dentro de la organización, para quien vaya a investigar, se le ponen anonimizados y de esa manera quedan liberados y tienen muchas ventajas jurídicas para poder trabajar con esos datos. Es una estrategia esencial en el ámbito de los datos personales. Me gustaría subrayar esta idea. ¿Quién es quién en la protección de datos y sus obligaciones? Aquí es muy compleja la gobernanza de los datos en las organizaciones centradas en la investigación. ¿Por qué? Subvenciones, distintos sujetos, sujetos en colaboración. Muchas veces falta de contratos entre todas las partes para dejar claro a quién va a poder acceder a qué datos han generado unos, qué datos han generado otros. Bien, sienten un jurista en su mesa para que les señalen si a efectos de protección de datos ustedes son tratantes de datos o son encargados que tratan datos para las finalidades de otros. Esto jurídicamente es muy importante. Se necesita, como regla general, contratos muy claros y, sobre todo, desde el punto de vista de la finalidad, que es proteger los datos personales. Si hay varias personas que meten mano en los datos, ya sea como titulares, ya sea como encargados que trabajan para otros, lo que se busca en estos contratos es que quede muy claro qué nivel de protección, qué garantías tienen que darse en unos y otros casos. Bien, ¿cómo deben tratarse los datos? Pues bien, fíjense ustedes, vamos a aplicar técnicas de investigación, técnicas de inteligencia artificial, técnicas propias del Big Data. Pues bueno, aquí tenemos unos principios que nos lo marca el Reglamento Europeo de Protección de Datos que emula la normativa colombiana. Principio de hemos de tratar los mínimos datos posibles. En el ámbito del Big Data, ¿cómo traducir esto? Solo podemos tratar los datos que sean adecuados. Hemos de dejar claro de dónde proceden los datos. Hemos de ser transparentes, que los afectados puedan saber de dónde proceden los datos. Tenemos que utilizar los datos solo para aquello que nos permiten utilizar los datos. Si los tenemos para una investigación determinada, la posibilidad de cambiar para finalidades que no sean investigativas va a ser muy difícil. En este sentido, me gustaría también recordar que como punto de partida se necesita distinguir también qué tipos de datos hay. Y en la investigación, especialmente en el ámbito biomédico, pero no solo en el ámbito biomédico, sino cada vez más trabajamos con datos biométricos que no son relativos a la mera identificación biométrica con huella dactilar, etc. Esos datos biométricos también son especialmente protegidos, tienen una carga, unas responsabilidades jurídicas mucho mayores. Distingamos los tratamientos de datos especialmente protegidos y también tratamientos masivos de datos y con inteligencia artificial. Es interesante distinguirlo porque se va a requerir, por lo general, un estudio de impacto específico. Es decir, entre las medidas de seguridad y las acciones a las que estamos obligados se necesitan unas obligaciones específicas de estudio de impacto que requiere ver qué riesgos tenemos, qué soluciones les vamos a poner. Y me gustaría recordar que todo tratamiento de datos requiere una legitimación. Y esto pasa por lo general de conseguir el consentimiento de las personas de cuyos datos estamos investigando. El punto de partida va a ser el consentimiento. Trabajemos bien el consentimiento de punto de partida para que nos den permiso a esas personas para utilizar los datos en el futuro. Ya les adelanto que la normativa europea y española ha flexibilizado muy mucho el hecho de que si contamos con datos legítimos de punto de partida, es decir, si yo voy al médico en una ocasión y doy el consentimiento para ese tratamiento de datos con finalidades médicas, si parto de un consentimiento de un tratamiento lícito, podamos desviar la finalidad, lo que era inicialmente para un tratamiento médico, para que podamos investigar. Es decir, las ventajas del tratamiento jurídico de la investigación, van a estar, entre otras cosas, que si el punto de partida es lícito, nos van a permitir tratar datos para finalidad científica, normalmente a cambio de que los pseudonimicemos. Es decir, que les apliquemos medidas de seguridad para que quienes investigan con ellos no sepan de quiénes son esos datos, aunque sea reversible, como por ejemplo si descubrimos haciendo investigación que una persona tiene un cáncer, pues poder dar con esa persona para comunicárselo. El sistema básico, y concluyo con ello, me gustaría que vieran ustedes esta idea. Más vale prevenir que curar. Y esto se aplica en la propuesta de Reglamento de Inteligencia Artificial de la Unión Europea, que básicamente es un sistema por el cual impone toda una serie de obligaciones a todos aquellos tratamientos de datos, aquellos usos de inteligencia artificial que se consideren de alto riesgo. Cuando el uso de la inteligencia artificial, igual que un tratamiento de datos, puede impactar más en la persona, en el caso de la inteligencia artificial se considera de alto riesgo y se imponen toda una serie de obligaciones. Diseñe usted la bicicleta previendo dónde son los posibles accidentes y poniendo más protecciones en los codos, más protecciones en la cabeza, más transparencia, más registros de cómo funciona el sistema de inteligencia artificial, qué es lo que ha hecho, cómo ha tratado esos datos, qué resultados ha habido, gobierne bien los datos, la calidad de esos datos de entrada y otra serie de garantías que dispone la propuesta de Reglamento de Inteligencia Artificial de la Unión Europea. Privacidad en el diseño, ventajas para el tratamiento de datos en la investigación, sí, a cambio de garantías. Garantías de anonimización, garantías de base legítima de los datos, partamos de datos legales y si partimos de datos legales para investigar, podrá usted utilizarlos con más flexibilidad. No obstante, hoy por hoy, como les digo, buena parte del mosaico legislativo del ámbito de la protección de datos es muy complejo y se requiere, quédense con esta idea, sienten desde el minuto cero a un abogado de su mesa en todo proyecto investigativo para que no se caiga como un castillo de naipes. Muchísimas gracias. Me gustaría poder atender a las cuestiones que ustedes tengan. Ha sido un placer y mucho éxito en este congreso. Muchísimas gracias.
Bueno, Yui, páralo. Bueno, agradecerles a todos por la asistencia, todo. Tenemos un cruce en este momento. Creo que no vamos a alcanzar a hacer como las conclusiones. Entonces, Moira, thanks in advance. And John, I don't know, John is left. And Jeroen is also left. He had a problem in the university. He had to attend some things. I have to a lot of thanks for your participation and all of your collaboration. Yeah. Many thanks. Profe Ángela, nos tocó porque se nos cruzó con un conferencista que ya llegó, entonces nos tocó cerrar acá.
Bueno, perfecto. No, Alberto, muchas gracias, muy interesante. Creo que muchas preguntas, lástima
Sí,
que no se
sí,
pudo
pero no
resolver.
alcanzamos.
Pero
Michael,
bueno, no, deja
excuse
muchas.
me, I am closing a colloquium and after some minutes I have with you, okay?
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much for attending this meeting. Very interesting.
Great people, Moira, many, many thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Michael, how are you?